Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hey there.
Today, we're jumping into a really sprawling conversation. It's Joe Rogan and Joey Diaz from the Joe Rogan Experience, episode #E2309.
Yeah, it's a long one. And our job really is to kind of cut through all that chat
Right.
and pull out the stuff that's actually, insightful, the knowledge nuggets.
Exactly. So you don't have to listen to the whole, 3 hours? We're doing the heavy lifting. We've gone through the YouTube transcript.
And it goes everywhere. We're talking Austin, Texas, changing, old school comedy stories, some pretty heavy societal observations, martial arts, UFOs even.
Seriously. UFOs.
Oh, yeah. It gets wild. But the idea is to find the connections, the interesting bits for you.
Okay, let's get into it. So first up, this Austin, Texas thing. They touch on how much it's changing.
Right, the influx of people. Diaz himself moved there, Jody Rose.
The sandwich shop.
That's the one. He's opening a sandwich shop there.
Okay.
Like a sign of the times, how cities boom and change.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it shows how creative types often lead that charge, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They find these places.
Opportunity, maybe cheaper living for a while, a community feel. And then suddenly, the whole vibe of the city shifts. It's fascinating.
And talking about Austin immediately gets Diaz thinking back. Nostalgia kicks in.
Yeah, the good old days of comedy in different cities. He tells that story about Greasy Tony.
Oh, the trash can sandwich. Classic Diaz.
Totally. But it's more than just a funny story, right? It's about how these larger-than-life characters become part of a scene's identity.
Yeah, the folklore of it all. Shared memories.
Exactly. These quirky details are what make a subculture feel real.
Then the conversation takes a bit of a turn. Diaz starts talking about societal trends he's seeing.
He brings up this phrase, tyranny of the marginalized.
Right, and talks about, the performance of wokeness.
Yeah.
It's pretty pointed stuff.
He uses the example of maybe unqualified people getting jobs, like firefighters, based on identity rather than skill.
Which is, a really charged topic.
Definitely. It touches on that tension between, inclusivity and competence, especially in jobs where lives are on the line. His view is clearly coming from a place of concern about competence.
It's one perspective, for sure. Provocative.
And then another pivot. Suddenly they're talking about Vito from The Sopranos.
The actor, Joseph Gannascoli. No, wait, that wasn't Vito. Vito was,
John Costello played Vito, yeah. Diaz mentions his tragic, real-life story, how he died.
Right. And he contrasts that with the comedy world, saying it's, way more accepting about sexual orientation.
Which is interesting, right? How different worlds, different industries can have such different norms. He paints the comedy scene, or at least his experience of it, as pretty accepting.
Value the funny above all else, maybe.
Something like that. Camaraderie, shared experience.
And he tells that story about his friend Scott Kennedy.
The comedian, yeah.
Said he was gay, but it was just a non-issue in their circle. Nobody cared.
Yeah. That personal stuff really lands, It makes the point stronger than just generalizing. Scott Kennedy was just Scott Kennedy, the funny guy.
Totally.
Yeah.
Then, okay, this part was wild. Rob Halford and Judas Priest.
Yeah.
The fashion influence. Diaz's take is that loads of straight guys back in the day copied the Judas Priest look.
Not realizing they were essentially dressing like, as Diaz puts it, a gay biker gang.
Because Halford was gay, and that was his look. But they just thought it looked cool and tough.
It's brilliant. Shows how style travels, and how clueless we can sometimes be about the origins of trends. The irony is just perfect.
And then they get into the lyrics. Diaz thinks Burning Up is pretty obviously about, gay themes.
Yeah, he makes a case for it, which again makes you think, doesn't it? How we interpret art, what the artist intended versus what we hear.
Did I hear that song differently back then?
Probably. We all probably did. Depends on your own lens.
All right, true.
Yeah.
Quick mention here, Rogan plugs his sponsor, the Farmer's Dog.
Standard podcast territory. Healthy dog food. Fits the vibe, sort of. Wellness for pets.
Right. Then Diaz, he shifts again. Back to his past. Pre-revolution Cuba.
And his mom's views on homosexuality, apparently she was pretty accepting for the time.
Yeah, more so than what he saw later, he says. Which is kind of counterintuitive, maybe? Thinking things always get more tolerant.
It shows it's not always a straight line, right? Different times, different places. His mom in Cuba back then versus
what he saw in Florida later. He tells that story about his friend's dad.
Yeah, having a really negative reaction to gay marriage, and Diaz witnessed that as a kid.
That stuff sticks with you, doesn't it? Seeing that kind of prejudice firsthand.
For sure. Probably shaped his own views quite a bit, seeing that contrast.
And that connects back to the Scott Kennedy story, too. The comedian friend.
How he didn't look stereotypically gay.
Exactly. Diaz makes the point, You just can't judge people based on how they look or what you think you know.
Super important point. We all do it, make assumptions. But it's so often wrong.
Then he tells this story about Montreal Comedy Festival. Some drunk comedian getting weird with him.
Right. And what stood out to me was his comment afterwards.
About how it's different for men and women.
Yeah. He could handle it, push the guy away, whatever. But he recognized, that for a woman in that situation, it's potentially much more dangerous, much scarier.
That's a really crucial observation. The power dynamics are just different.
Absolutely. It shows some real awareness there.
Moving on. Diaz mentions knowing a gay couple in California.
And they're staunch Republicans.
Yeah. Which kind of throws stereotypes out the window again, doesn't it?
Totally. People's politics are complicated. It's not just about one identity marker. It's about their whole life, their priorities, what they care about.
True. Okay, now things get pretty heavy for a bit. Alan Turing.
Oh, man. Yeah. The father of AI, basically. The Turing test.
And the story is just devastating. Persecuted for being gay.
Chemical castration.
Yeah.
Forced hormone treatment. It's barbaric.
And it led to his suicide. The guy who helped win the war with his code breaking, who laid the groundwork for computers, treated like that.
The irony is just sickening. His mind gave us so much, and society basically destroyed him for who he loved. It's a brutal piece of history.
Diaz reacts pretty strongly to that and connects it to fundamentalist views today.
Yeah, he worries about going backwards. He uses Iran as an example.
Saying how it used to be much more liberal before the revolution. It's a scary thought, societal regression.
It is. That idea that progress isn't guaranteed, that freedoms can be lost. It's a stark warning.
And that leads him to talk about the U.S., doesn't it? Concerns about freedoms here.
Yeah, he kind of links it to things like the perceived decline of L.A., maybe worries about government overreach.
And automation taking jobs. He mentions Andrew Yang, the longshoreman strike.
Right. It feels like he's weaving together a bunch of anxieties: economic anxiety, social anxiety, political anxiety. The world feels unstable to him.
That longshoreman strike, that's real jobs on the line because of automation. It's close to home for a lot of people.
For sure. And it triggers another bout of nostalgia in him.
The industrial boom towns. Detroit, Cleveland.
Buffalo, Pittsburgh. Cities built on industry that then just faded.
When the jobs went overseas, he brings up Ross Perot.
The giant sucking sound. Remember that?
Yeah. Oh, blast from the past. But Perot was kind of right, wasn't he? About globalization's impact.
In many ways, yeah. Those changes reshaped America profoundly. We're still feeling it.
Okay, a little bit of a breather. Diaz tells a story about a prankster police chief.
Haha, yeah. And something about Ari Shaffir doing something weird on stage.
Right. Need those moments of absurdity in a Diaz story.
Keeps it balanced. You can't just talk heavy stuff for 3 hours straight.
True. Then shift again. Boxing.
Ah, yeah. You can hear the passion when they talk boxing. Tommy Hearns.
The hitman. His power. That Duran knockout.
Vicious. They really paint a picture of that era.
And the Hagler-Hearns fight. The war.
Incredible fight. And Diaz drops that detail. Hearns broke his hand.
In the first round.
Insane. Fighting like that with a broken hand against marvelous Marvin Hagler, that's just next level toughness.
Unbelievable. Then they get to Hagler versus Sugar Ray Leonard.
The controversial one. Lots of people still debate that decision. Diaz hints at maybe a fix.
Yeah, there's always been talk around that fight. And then Hagler just leaves boxing.
And becomes a movie star in Italy, of all things.
Which leads to them kind of making fun of his acting.
Gently. But yeah, apparently those Italian action movies were something else.
A bit over the top, maybe.
Seems like it. It's a funny image, though. Hagler, the action hero.
Then they talk about Clint Eastwood, how he had that, rebellious, don't care attitude in his movies.
Yeah, contrasting that with maybe how things are in Hollywood now.
A sort of nostalgia for that kind of unapologetic character, maybe?
Could be. That feeling that maybe things are a bit safer now. Less raw. A common critique.
And Diaz definitely isn't about being safe or pretentious. He tells that story about the moms hugging trees.
Haha, yeah. And how he just wants people to be straightforward. No nonsense.
Very on brand for him. Cut the crap, basically.
Exactly.
Then another nostalgia trip. News Radio.
Great show. And they point out how it wasn't a huge ratings hit back then.
But it's huge in reruns. People still love it. Enduring appeal.
Yeah, sometimes shows just find their audience later, Build that cult following.
Diaz also weighs in on recent mafia movies and actors who get really political.
He seems to think it can hurt their acting credibility, right? If they're constantly sounding off about politics.
Yeah, like it makes it harder to believe them as different characters on screen.
Mm,
It's an interesting take on celebrity culture.
it is. Does knowing an actor's strong opinions change how you see their performance? For some people, maybe it does.
They also touch on COVID's impact, movie theaters versus streaming.
Big shift. Huge. How we watch stuff has fundamentally changed.
No kidding. Diaz mentions some shows he likes, Slow Horses.
Severance, Black Mirror, Taylor Sheridan stuff like 1923, Landman.
Gives you a sense of his taste. Seems to like gritty, well-made stuff.
Yeah, and he gives props to Taylor Sheridan. Says he's consistently good.
Recommends Sicario, too. Intense movie.
Very. Shows he appreciates that kind of filmmaking.
Then a little grumble about Netflix not releasing that new Addams Family show with Jen Ortega.
Yeah. The mystery of streaming release dates. We've all been there, waiting for something.
Totally. Then back to sports, but the business side. UFC's TV deal.
With ESPN expiring, could they go to Netflix?
They recall that time a UFC pay-per-view on a streaming platform crashed because too many people tried to watch.
Right. Big technical hurdles for live sports on streaming, but maybe Netflix has the muscle now. It would be a massive shift.
They also analyze the UFC pay-per-view market now. Diaz thinks maybe casual fans are dropping off.
Because there's so many events, and lots of good fights are free on the undercards now.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe dilutes the specialness of the pay-per-views a bit. Market saturation.
Could be. It's a tricky balance for them.
They recap some recent fights, Volkanovski versus Lopez, that
Yep.
John Silva guy.
From the Fighting Nerds team in Brazil, using data science in training.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Applying analytics to MMA training.
Shows how sports evolve, right? Finding any edge you can. It's not just grit anymore, it's science too.
Then they talk about GSP, Georges St. Pierre.
Huge admiration there for how he kept learning, kept evolving.
Even after retiring, he's still training, still learning. Diaz sees him as, like, the embodiment of a true martial artist.
Yeah, that lifelong dedication to growth, not just about winning belts, but about mastering the art.
And Diaz reflects on his own journey, thinking about going back to Taekwondo.
But just for drills, he says. Not sparring. Getting back to basics.
And the importance of drilling in jiu-jitsu. He mentions training with Eddie Bravo, repetition, muscle memory.
Absolutely key. It's not always glamorous, but drilling is where you build the real skill.
They mention flow rolling in BJJ.
Yeah.
Trying to spar playfully, technically.
But how hard that is to actually do. Ego gets in the way, intensity creeps up.
So true. It's tough to keep it light sometimes.
Diaz tells a good story about sparring with an older kickboxer, though.
Right. How light technical sparring was super beneficial. Not just trying to take each other's heads off.
Exactly. Skill development over just banging. Smart training.
And he says that's kind of his approach now. Balancing boxing, BJJ,
Yeah.
but being mindful.
Listening to his body more, especially after that health scare he mentions.
Yeah, that comes up next, and it's pretty intense.
He gets really detailed about being hospitalized. Congestive heart failure.
Fluid retention, the whole thing. Triggered, he thinks, by taking MK677.
Which is a growth hormone secretagogue. Not exactly harmless stuff.
No. And he mentions having issues before with testosterone, high red blood cells.
It's incredibly candid, sharing that level of detail about serious health problems. It's a real cautionary tale.
Definitely. He talks about his wellness coach, Brigham.
And some AI health tool he uses.
Yeah, sounds like he's leaning on tech and coaching to manage things now. Personalized health is a big trend.
For sure. Using data to stay on top of it.
Okay. Now brace yourself. Here come the UFOs.
Right, the Jackie Gleason story.
Allegedly, Gleason gets drunk with Richard Nixon.
And Nixon takes him to an Air Force base and shows him alien bodies.
That's the story. It sounds completely nuts, but Diaz tells it. And says Gleason got obsessed with UFOs after, built a saucer-shaped house.
It's one of those legendary, unverifiable tales, isn't it? Like, did it happen? Probably not like that, but what a story.
It definitely sparks a wider chat about aliens. Are they here? Underwater bases?
All the classic questions. The sheer possibility is fascinating, even if the Gleason story is, probably just a story.
Diaz seems skeptical about government honesty on stuff like this.
Yeah.
Brings up the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, that feeling of, we're probably not being told the whole truth. It's a common sentiment.
And he wonders how people would even react if aliens were confirmed. Panic. Division.
It's a valid question. Would it unite us? Or just create more chaos? Hard to say.
The conversation then shifts pretty dramatically again. Immigration. deportation.
Diaz gets passionate here, talking about due process.
Yes, strongly against the idea of deporting people just based on, like, tattoos or suspicion, worries about abuse of power.
He brings up personal stories, seems really concerned about fairness and basic rights, regardless of who's in charge.
Comparison to Japan, where tattoos can get you banned from places because of the Yakuza connection, different cultural context.
Right. But his core point is about process and rights in the U.S. system.
He sounds pretty frustrated with the political climate overall. Feels like free speech is eroding.
Yeah, that polarization makes it hard to just talk, he seems to think, which is bad for finding truth, for society evolving.
A lot of people feel that way, I think, on all sides.
He also talks about his own experiences with, like, alternative health stuff.
And being skeptical of big pharma, especially after COVID, felt like things were censored.
Again, reflects a viewpoint that gained traction during the pandemic, questioning mainstream institutions.
He mentions rising death rates, all-cause mortality, worries people are just conforming.
Uses that pretty harsh little rats analogy, following narratives without thinking.
Yeah, it's a strong image. Shows his level of concern about, like, groupthink.
He even jokes, kind of darkly, about how people might react if aliens showed up. Some would probably just betray humanity immediately.
Oh, man. Cynical, but maybe a little bit true. Provocative, anyway.
Then he gets philosophical. Cycles of civilization. Can societies collapse if they don't fix things?
Uses California as his example of potential decline. It's a sobering thought.
Yeah, that idea that nothing lasts forever if you don't tend to the foundations. History has examples.
He wraps up that section talking about the internet being overwhelming, misinformation.
Like the Kennedy report, the Epstein list. Maybe they're distractions.
From focusing on your own life, your own problems. Interesting point about information overload.
Yeah, how do you filter what actually matters day to day?
Okay, shifting to more everyday stuff. Diaz hates small talk.
Yeah. Wants people to get to the point. Tells that contractor story.
Relatable for a lot of people, I bet. Just be direct.
He also complains about customer service. Feels like nobody's trained properly anymore.
Another common gripe. Seems to be a widespread feeling.
And he reflects on how generations change. Kids driving, playing outside, unsupervised.
How different it is now. Technology, safety concerns. It's changed childhood.
Big time. Then they have a quick laugh about smelling salts.
And preview the UFC fights coming up in Jersey. Back to familiar ground.
Bringing it back down to earth a bit.
But then, Diaz circles back to his health. Starts with a funny story about needing to pee all the time.
It's especially when sick, or on mushrooms, apparently.
But it leads into the really serious retelling of that recent crisis, the hospitalization.
Yeah, the crazy high blood pressure, low oxygen. Sounds absolutely terrifying.
It really does. He gives the diagnosis, again, congestive heart failure, the fluid weight gain.
Explains the treatment. It really brings home how serious it was. A real brush with mortality.
And he thinks again about the causes. MK677, maybe the past testosterone use. Trying to understand it.
Taking responsibility, seems like. Figuring out what went wrong.
He ends by saying he's committed to getting healthier, working with his coach.
Throws in a joke about still smoking weed.
And that Bill Hicks quote about weed and motivation. I was going to build, but then I got high.
Classic. Ends on a note that's pure Diaz, serious health commitment, mixed with his usual humor.
Well, that really was a deep dive, wasn't it? Covered so much ground.
It's amazing. What starts as just two guys talking can go to so many unexpected places.
Yeah, you get the laughs, the personal stuff, but also these, like, really insightful moments. That's why these long talks are gold, I think.
Totally agree. The tangents are often where the best stuff hides. You get the raw commentary, the health journey.
Yeah.
It's all woven together.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Think about how you balance entertainment and information. Were you getting substance or just noise?
Yeah, and are you digging into the conversations around you? Or just kind of skimming? There might be unexpected insights waiting.
Definitely check out the full JRE episode if you want the full experience, all the detours. It's hashtag 2309.
And hopefully this dive gave you the highlights, the key takeaways, without needing the full 3 hours. A shortcut to being a bit more informed.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Catch you next time.